Okay, well, welcome everyone. I'm Scott Gardner with the Wyoming County Chamber, and I thank everyone for joining us today for a COVID-19 virus and vaccine conversation and webinar. We have two guests with us today. Fortunately, we have Dr. Elizabeth Murray. She is a board certified in pediatrics and pediatric emergency medicine and holds appointments in both the departments of pediatrics and emergency medicine at the University of Rochester and is active with the Division of Pre-Hospital Medicine. She also has an MBA and a bachelor's in economics. So she has pretty diverse background, which is great for us today. We also have with us Kathi Lynch, the Health and Planning Research Analyst at Common Ground Health. As a health planning research analyst, Kathi Lynch supports several different Common Ground Health initiatives, including updating web data and generating project reports. She joined the organization in 2014, bringing more than 15 years of project manager analyst experience to her position. And certainly when you have a chance to speak, you can also maybe tell a little bit more about yourselves if you'd like. I think it's interesting, Dr. Murray's background being in pediatric medicine. There's so much conversation going on right now about young people getting vaccines that it's nice to have you here with us today. So that would be great. Kathi is going to take over the screen and manage the PowerPoint, and she's going to present along with Dr. Murray. So we'll let them take over at this point and say hellos or anything that you want to do right now.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, I'm going to share my screen. And while I do that, I'll also let you know that as my role at Common Ground, I also go out to the surrounding counties outside of Monroe that we serve. And I work with health departments in those counties, helping them do their health improvement planning, their community health assessments that are done periodically. So I get to do some traveling, or I did get to do some traveling pre-COVID.
Well, we hope you come back out and see us, right? pretty soon.
All right, so can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
All right, great. So we're just going to be here today, Dr. Murray and I, this morning talking about COVID, as well as some information about the COVID vaccines, reasons for getting it or not, choosing to get it, if you have some issues or underlying allergic issues. But I'll get into these particular topics right now. We're going to take a look at what is COVID, look at how scientists had a head start on vaccine development, reasons why you would want to take the COVID vaccine, look at some of the distribution efforts to ensure equitable distribution of the vax are underway, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers at the end. If you do have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat because we'll take a look at those questions as well. So what is COVID? COVID is a disease caused by the coronavirus. And if you recall back about 20 years ago, there was a SARS outbreak. And about 10 years ago, there was a MERS outbreak. Those were both coronaviruses that caused those epidemics, if you will. And what happened in 2019 was a new coronavirus was discovered. And that was called the coronavirus. It causes the coronavirus disease 2019. Hence, we get COVID-19. Now, I'm sure you're all aware of the possible symptoms of COVID-19, the dry cough that was so terrible we've heard from folks who had it, trouble breathing, headaches, loss of smell and taste, a list of long symptoms that were prevalent with those suffering from COVID. What we learned also was that you could spread COVID even if you had none of those symptoms. So it was really important to try to take care not to spread COVID since, you could have it and not even know you did. So guidelines that were put into place to prevent spreading COVID included wearing a mask over your nose and your mouth, staying distance of 6 feet or more from each other, washing hands thoroughly and often, and staying home when you're sick. So if you didn't feel well, just staying home. And these were all guidelines the CDC put out to try to minimize the spread of COVID-19. So when we take a look at the vaccine development that took place last year and to get the vaccines to market to try to get ahead of the pandemic, keep in mind, scientists had a head start on that work. As I said, SARS occurred 20 years ago, MERS was about 10 years ago, and the vaccine development started, well before the coronavirus hit in 2019. So the vaccine development process, we look at clinical trials start with phase 1, where we have 20 to 100, healthy volunteers who step up and say, I'll be your guinea pig, I'll be willing to take the vaccine. And the researchers are trying to determine if the vaccine is safe, does it work, are there any serious side effects? And this is phase 1, just early days in the study of that vaccine. Phase 2 is when we look at, several hundred volunteers. And at this stage, researchers want to know what's the most common side effects, short term. What is the body's immune response? So is the vaccine making your body generate the antibodies that are required to fight the targeted virus? And is the vaccine protective? Is your body making vaccines at the level that will offer and provide protection against the virus that you're testing it for? After those questions are answered, successfully, the vaccines enter a phase 3. And this is where we see thousands of people who have volunteered to get the vaccine, get vaccinated. And in this instance, for the 3 vaccines that received emergency use from the FDA, that was over 70,000 individuals worldwide received one of the 3 vaccines that were approved in the phase 3 trials. And this is when we look at, reasons the researchers want to know is, do the disease rates vary from the vaccinated group to the unvaccinated group? And how well does the vaccine work? What level of protection do you get from getting the vaccines? Typically then what you see is a phase 4 is when the vaccine is approved, fully approved by the FDA, when it's determined it's safe, effective, and the benefits of the vaccine outweigh the risks. And research then continues for another, 2 to 5 years, depending on the study, as they then start collecting long-term data, looking for the benefits or any long-term side effects that may occur. So that's generally what occurs with vaccine trials and how the vaccines go from, the early stages to fully deployed into the population. So in addition to scientists having a head start on coronavirus because of the previous outbreaks, they also had additional funding. Generally, lack of funding is what can slow down vaccine research. But last year, the US government poured billions of dollars into vaccine research, kind of streamlined some processes that generally would take a lot longer than they normally would, resulting in a lot faster turnaround in getting the vaccine into arms, as well as the technology that was developed using the messenger RNA, which I'll talk a little bit about. So the 3 vaccines that were authorized were Pfizer's, Moderna's, and Johnson & Johnson's. And I'll just talk briefly about the pause that occurred back in April with the J&J vaccine. And that's because there were 15 reports of a rare type of blood clot following about 7 million shots. So a small percentage of those who got the shots developed blood clots, and scientists paused the deployment of this J&J vaccine while they researched and reviewed data to get a better understanding of any correlations that may exist between the blood clots and the vaccine. What was determined was that they were able to use that time to research and develop protocols and treatments for those clots if they occurred after the J&J vaccine. The pause really showed that the vaccine safety system works, that they're monitoring globally, they're taking a look at who's getting which vaccine and any particular or possible side effects of them are being closely watched. They also realized that the clots, they're called CVST clots. People with COVID actually get the same clotting, and 39 of every 1 million individuals who get COVID could get the same type of clot. With the J&J vaccine, that's 2 people out of 1 million. So the odds are a lot smaller for the clotting to occur with use of the J&J vaccine as opposed to if you actually got COVID. So again, when you take a look at the benefit outweighing the risk, the vaccine looks to be the best avenue to take. Now, there's been some determination as to who shouldn't get the vaccine. And we'll start with those who are already under isolation or quarantine for having COVID. You know, you don't go out and leave your home to get vaccinated, you stay home. Anyone who's already had COVID and was sick enough to get antibody therapy or convalescent plasma within the last 90 days, I'm sorry. People with allergic reactions to polyethylene glycol or polysorbate or any of the other components of the vaccine. I have a very good friend who can't take the vaccine because she's allergic to, and she's not even quite sure which, she and her doctor have talked about it, one of the components in the vaccine. So she's waiting for another formulation. I know they're working on developing a pill, developing a nasal spray, which won't have the same makeup or composition as the vaccine does. Also, currently, those under 12 can only get the Pfizer vax. Moderna and J&J have not yet completed trials in those younger populations. But you can still get a vaccine if you've had a mild or local reaction or low-grade fever from the first dose. Go ahead and get the second. If you're on most medications, there will be no interference with those medications working if you get the vaccine. If you're allergic to eggs, you can get the vaccine. There's no egg product in the vaxes. And if you have a history of penicillin allergy, have relatives with allergies, or receive allergen extract immunotherapy, you can still get the vaccine. And if you've had COVID, yes, you can still go ahead and get vaccinated. Now, we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Now, some people have questions about the vaccine, and look at the evidence that's available. There's a lot of information out there, vetted information about them, and scientists are seeing that the vaccines really help massively decrease the spread of COVID-19. It remains a fact, getting a COVID vaccine is your choice. It's normal to have questions and concerns, which is why Common Ground Health is doing sessions like this in the region. But do keep in mind, if you choose not to get vaccinated, you do have a responsibility to protect others and by wearing a mask and staying distant. Because there are folks who, for whatever reason, like my friend, who cannot get the vaccine and remains unvaccinated. There are people who are immunocompromised who remain susceptible to the COVID virus. So in order to protect those folks, we continue to mask and continue to social distance for the present time. So why take the vaccine? First off, it really will help keep you, your family, and community healthy and safe. The vaccines will eventually help us to get where we don't have to wear masks anymore. And I think we're approaching that point. We've already heard recommendations that people who are fully vaccinated don't have to wear a mask when they're out and about. Still saying, really avoid large crowds, but, we're almost getting to where we can leave the house without a mask on. And think about summer coming up. You'll be able to go to the baseball games and go to the weddings and go to the family reunions without having to worry about, distancing from the people you're meeting. And getting COVID will give you some natural immunity, but we don't know how long that protection will last. And in fact, scientists are right now working on boosters for this vaccine. And that's part, a lot of reasons going into not knowing exactly how long the vaccines will work, but also they're developing vaccines that will target the variants that they're starting to see as the COVID virus mutates. And getting vaccinated is a much safer way to build your immune system protection. You won't get a severe case of COVID or possibly a fatal case of COVID from the vaccine. You may get that sick or die from getting COVID-19, the virus. And then the vaccination helps eliminate the major risk of severe illness and death, as I just said, from COVID. So those are all good reasons to get the vaccine. It's normal for you to have an immune response after being vaccinated. That's the whole point. And this is where you see those side effects. You hear things talking about, soreness and what have you. This is a sign that the vaccine is really prompting your immune system to build the protection it needs to fight the virus. So common side effects, I include injection pain site, over the upper arm where that needle went in. Also hear a lot of people say they've had some fatigue, low-grade fever, headache, body aches. You generally have these side effects within a day or two of getting the vaccine, but they don't last longer than 24 hours or so. My daughter recovered from her second shot, she had the slight fever, low-grade fever. She was fine the next day. Now, I mentioned that these are the Moderna and Pfizer are both messenger RNA, mRNA vaccines. And what this is, they use protein that mimics the COVID-19 protein, and that's what's in the vaccine. When your body sees these proteins in the mRNA vaccines, it starts to make the antibodies to fight what it thinks is COVID-19 virus. So your body's prepped when it does encounter the real COVID-19 virus, it's prepped to make the antibodies that's necessary because it got the instructions from the mRNA vaccine. Now, this doesn't do anything to your genes, it doesn't change your RNA, it just provides instructions to your body on how to make the right antibodies to fight the COVID virus. So once the mRNA delivers its message to your immune system, it's destroyed, your body breaks it down, and nothing changes as far as your DNA or your genetic code. Similarly, the J&J vaccine, it uses a cold virus. So we've all had the cold. We know the cold viruses are pretty manageable. They're harmless. This particular strain is a harmless strain of a cold virus. And it does similar thing where it carries instructions to your body, to your immune system, to help it kickstart the development of antibodies that will fight COVID-19 viruses if your body encounters the real thing. They also are destroyed. These cold viruses are also destroyed in your body once it's delivered the instructions that it's meant to. Now, do vaccines blunt effectiveness of other medications in general? No, they don't. Those medications will continue to work, but you have any concerns or questions, it's best to talk to your provider, your healthcare provider. So they're safe, they're effective, and they're free. So there's no cost to get the COVID-19 vaccine. There may be some administrative charges that the person or the organization that's administering the shots might charge, but that should be covered by insurances. There should be no out-of-pocket cost. And even if you don't have insurance, there's still no cost to you. So even after getting vaccinated, however, you continue to wear your mask over your nose and mouth, continue to remain socially distant, wash your hands often and thoroughly, and stay home if you start to feel sick. And these are, precautions because it takes about 2 weeks to be fully protected, fully vaccinated, 2 weeks after you get that second shot for Moderna and Pfizer. So you want to keep protecting yourself and others until that period of time has elapsed. As far as equitable distribution, one thing we learned last year was that COVID-19 has affected Blacks and Latinos much harder than other members of the population. And in fact, Blacks and Latinos are twice as likely to die from COVID-19. And a lot of reasons for that, primarily being that being as frontline workers, majority of which are Black and Latinos, living in multi-generational households who did not have the opportunity to isolate and distance and work from home and not be exposed on a regular basis, we saw that it hit those populations harder. So what Common Ground Health has done is we created Mythbusters on Facebook Live, on our Facebook Live page, and it's hosted by Dr. Linda Clark on the left, who is our Chief Medical Officer, and Reverend Phyllis Jackson, who's a registered nurse, and they do a really nice job. They've done about 4 or 5 episodes where they talk about COVID, they talk about the vaccines, and they address some of the things that, the myths that are floating around out there in the community about the vaccines, try to encourage people to learn more and make an informed decision. We also share that the vaccines endorsed by Black doctors and nurses, the National Medical Association and the Black Physicians Network of Greater Rochester, reviewed the safety data and support the use of the vaccines, and the Rochester Black Nurses Association also supports their use. So just getting information out to folks so again, they can make an informed decision. This is a website by New York State, ny.gov/vaccine, where you can go to get a lot of information about COVID, a lot of information about the vaccines. It's updated regularly. And then more locally, if you need help, you can dial 211 or go to 211wny.org for online assistance with anything that may be of need to you. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing. And open it up for Q&A. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to jump in.
Right, we've got the chat box open here. Can maybe Dr. Murray and Kathi, would you talk about some of the concerns that people have with young people getting the vaccine, and what those concerns are, and when we might be looking at when it might be safe to get them, and your perspective on really probably like the 18 and under, and then particularly the really little folks that were still, not quite there yet.
Yeah, as you can see, the Lego villages behind me, I have those real little folks in my household. And I think that's such an important question because, children are about a quarter of the population. And in pediatricians, we say 25% of the population, 100% of our future. And so thinking about what's happening in the lives of kids is certainly really, really important. Somewhere along the way, the message of kids are not getting as sick from COVID kind of flipped to kids don't get sick, so we don't have to worry about them. And unfortunately, that's just not exactly the case. Sure, far and wide, children do much, much better than adults in general. And by children, we're actually talking about kids who are not teenagers, so the under teenagers. Once you get to be a teenager, their bodies are acting much more like adults with regards to severity of disease. So we know that millions of children have had COVID-19. We know that tens of thousands have been hospitalized. We know throughout the United States alone, about 300 children have died from COVID-19. So that's, to kind of put it into perspective, that's about twice or so the amount of children who die from influenza every year in the United States. So it certainly is impacting children. Plus, of course, we know about 44,000 children have lost parents due to COVID-19. And then obviously we know children have been disrupted in their regular lives because of school closures and loss of social activity. So the impact on children is certainly very, very great. As pediatricians, we also know a lot about vaccines. We are all about vaccination. And I think if we could go back to think about some of the information Kathi shared about vaccine development, it's so critical. The reason historically some vaccines have taken a long time to create is because of the funding stream. This is the first time in modern history where we had governments pour almost billions of dollars into research. And so normally what happens is a lab, a research facility has an idea. The University of Rochester has been working on a universal flu vaccine in the past. So, maybe they come up with something that they think will work. Then another institution has to go out and get grant funding to either replicate their work or build on their work. And then another institution, again, has to go out, find funding to do the research and then do it. And so it's this sequential process that happens. In this situation, there was almost unlimited resources so that all of those steps were happening simultaneously. So it wasn't researchers trying to scrape for funding to get stuff done. Everybody throughout the nation, throughout the world actually had what they needed so that everybody was all hands on deck. Everybody was able to do those processes together at the same time. So they were replicating each other's work in real time instead of doing it sequentially. So that helped a little bit with the speed as well, of course, not missing any of the steps. And then, one of you've heard in the news, I'm sure, the University of Rochester is a study site for the COVID vaccine in children. And one of the researchers, Dr. Jenny Nye, actually was a residency classmate of mine. So I've known her for a very long time. And now I know her as, this amazing scientist, but I still remember when her children were born. She's a mom of 3, I'm a mom of 2. I know her socially and I know her personally. And I think that there's so much misinformation flying around that when it comes to getting this information, having the personal connection, whether it be with your physician, family physician, pediatrician, nurse practitioner, those relationships are so critical and important. And, just for me, knowing her and knowing her ethics and knowing her abilities, I think if anybody had a concern, I know that she is part of a team that's doing ethical good work. And for me, that is very reassuring and helpful because, like I said, I'm a mom of 2. My children are both currently too young to qualify for vaccination. We're eagerly awaiting some birthdays this summer that one of them will be old enough to be vaccinated. But, there is a lot of misinformation out there. But what we do know is children certainly are impacted. We know that these vaccines have a phenomenally great safety profile. on par with many other vaccines we have. The difference in the technology is actually great and groundbreaking, and I think we'll see this technology go on to help us fight a number of diseases, which is going to be wonderful. A big one of those diseases being cancer, so when we can get more mRNA research out, that's going to be fabulous. And I also, too, I think it's important to remember that kids are unique and that they are the ones who are suffering this COVID side effect called MISC, or this multi-system inflammatory process. Now, the cases, again, nationwide are relatively small, but they are far more severe. To be diagnosed with this, it means you are critically ill. So any child who has this is by definition critically ill, and the rate of death is closer to about 10%. So higher in that population. We know locally, I don't know the most recent numbers. I know in February we had about 19 children hospitalized with MISC at the University of Rochester. I'm not sure what the more recent months numbers have been. I know there definitely are children in our ICU right now who are being treated for it. So, this is certainly very real. The trick is, if I could say, well, the only children that are affected have X, Y, and Z in common, then that might be helpful, but we can't. We just don't have that information. We know, just like with adults, healthy adults can get really, really sick. And then people who you would think would get really, really sick can have a mild course. And so there is so much variability to it that, protecting everybody with the vaccine is just so critically important. All right, that was a really long answer. Sorry. But
Oh, it was a good.
I get passionate.
Yes, well, there was a lot in there listening to that. So thank you. On the mRNA vaccines that, most of us are more familiar with the traditional, flu shot that's grown in an egg.
Not anymore. Not exactly. Not anymore. It's okay.
No, and that's
people who are allergic to eggs can have flu vaccines now.
Right. So that's sort of that common, like that's what everyone thinks. And the mRNA, we've heard a lot about it, but it's actually, as I understand it, something that's been around for quite some time. And even we're a big dairy county. It's been used in veterinary medicine for a long time for vaccines for animals. So we've talked to some vets and they're like, oh yeah, we've been doing this for a long time. This is not anything new. We're just hearing a lot about it now. And I know you touched on it in the presentation about what it does, but maybe can you tell a little bit more about how that communicates and what that protein does and how it's communicating with the body, that it's not changing the DNA, and what that message is like? What is it doing?
Yeah, so it's really kind of like a blueprint, right? You can't build a house unless you have a construction crew and a foreman and all that kind of stuff, and you need the blueprints, right? But the blueprints alone aren't going to do anything for you. The house isn't going to build itself. So if you can think of the mRNA as kind of the blueprint, and in fact, it does not go into the nucleus or the control center of the cell where the DNA is. So it's just, and it also is very finicky. And what I mean by that is it doesn't tolerate much of anything different than what it likes. So you hear about how the vaccines have to be really temperature controlled when the person is actually mixing up the vaccine. They can't shake it at all. They have to be very gentle with it. mRNA has one purpose and one purpose only, and it's to provide instructions. And then it's kind of like those old, TV shows, crime show, or spy shows where they'll say this message is going to self-destruct in 10 seconds. And that's kind of how mRNA is. It delivers its message and then it's done. And so it cannot do anything else. So you can recognize what that house is going to look like when you look at the blueprints, but you can't live in the blueprints because it's not yet a house. And that's how I kind of think about it.
It's slightly, so the Pfizer and the Moderna are just slightly different, though, how they were crafted than the Johnson & Johnson?
So the Johnson & Johnson is different. It's got the fun name to say. It's called a viral vector vaccine. So fun to say. But the Johnson & Johnson, so it takes that adenovirus, so that kind of cold germ, and it takes a segment of it to help introduce the information to the powerhouse, the control center of your cell, versus the mRNA giving you the blueprints in this different way. If you think about the pictures of what the actually germ looks like, it's got all the spikes on it. And so what we're talking about here is coding for some of the spike proteins on the germ. So it makes it recognizable to your body's defense system. And so it doesn't code for all of the spike proteins, it just for some critical ones. And that's what we're kind of watching as the variants change. Are we still able to, are we still coding for the right spike proteins so that our bodies can recognize the germ as foreign and then go to work to surround it and destroy it.
Great. Now, when you get the vaccine, you've been vaccinated, and about 43% of our county has. I know New York State is running at about, what, 54, 55% right now, I think I saw.
And I think, tell me if it's different, the numbers you're giving me, but when we talk about those numbers, we're talking about population as whole. We're not talking about those who are eligible for vaccination. So I think it's, on the long term, it's a nice number, but it's also a little bit tricky because, right? Is that how you, okay, because it's, I mean, remember, we have a large percentage of the population that still cannot be vaccinated, so.
Right, so that represents, here it's about, I think it's about 13,000 people or so. So there's a lot of still eligible people that could get it. And I know that, so I'm going a little different direction. A lot of our employers are, have been concerned, and some are hosting clinics on site. Our ag community has worked, we've worked with Cornell Cooperative Extension and different farms and set up events because we have a lot of Latino, Hispanic, migrant workers, and they want to make sure that their workforce is stable. So it's, providing materials in Spanish and providing opportunities for them to get it. So the hard part is that, when we almost need to get the ability to do it sooner, how it was phased, we needed to actually get people vaccinated sooner because now they're, in planting season. So it was kind of a mad rush when they were able to get it done. But employers have real concerns about, getting their employees vaccinated and not mandating it, but strongly suggesting that it's a good idea while not being, it's an interesting balance that everybody's kind of taking with this because of it not being an fully approved, still an emergency authorization. So are there any maybe suggestions or tips that you could offer employers, because it's so important that their workforces are healthy, and that because as soon as they're healthy, right, that they can get their processes back to normal too. They're not segregating employees and doing the social distancing. Are there any tips that you might have that employers could use that are watching to speak to their employees about why it's important, or anything that you might come to mind there?
Yeah, I'm sure Kathy's going to have something too. I'll just quickly say that, the mass vaccination strategy needed to happen at first because we had to get some of our most vulnerable populations vaccinated, and we had to do that. And I think public health officials always knew that things were going to have to change down the road. And so that's where we are now. We're in the phase of the more personalized approach, right? Because those who remain unvaccinated have a variety of all very legitimate reasons, whether they have questions, whether they're too young, whether it's lack of access. There's many different reasons for lack of vaccination in parts of the population right now. And so this kind of really a much more micro approach, business by business, community by community, street by street, whatever it needs to be to help do that. And so I think that there isn't, unfortunately, a one size fits all approach. So for the business owners, I think they need to talk with their employees and figure out, what's been the barrier so far. Is it that there was a social media post that got passed around that's really, really inflammatory and scary? And can you speak to the facts of the situation to counterbalance whatever that hyperbolic Facebook post was? Or is it is there a concern for a religious concern for some reason? Or is it just simply that people are afraid to miss work? We know some of the regulations have changed as far as time off from work after vaccination, because many people will just feel gross for the day after. And so, if you have a lot of pressure to not miss a day at work, then that pressure can be so great that you perhaps choose to not be vaccinated. So, making sure that your workforce knows that they have some flexibility, because as the employer, you recognize the greater good of making sure your workforce is healthy, that if they have to take a day after vaccination, that is well worth it, because they're going to be safe in the long run, and you're going to have this robust, healthy workforce. You're going to be looked at as an employer who really respects and cares for their employees, and that's super important. Kathi, what do you think?
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say everything you said. I second that. Those are things I was going to recommend. Really educational programs to combat some of the misinformation, and then providing those incentives to folks to get vaccinated. Because I found this out yesterday, New York State's actually in getting people lottery tickets. You can get lottery tickets at the Dome if you go to get vaccinated, which you could potentially win millions of dollars. So, incentives like that, even if it's a day off, like you said, to get the vaccine or to recover from the vaccinations, just ensuring that the workplace stays healthy and remains healthy. And I think one of the things that's missing in the conversation that we need to start rolling into the conversation moving forward is some of the long-term effects that we're seeing with folks who have recovered from COVID. It's not just, oh, I'm better, and you walk away. Some folks have long-lasting effects, 6 months to a year out after recovering from COVID, and can't go back to normal life.
So. Again, sort of medically here, so you get the vaccine and you still, hopefully where you travel about, we all sort of carry one in our pocket now that we're vaccinated, and going in and out of, different places, respecting if a business says, right now we're just asking everybody to remain masked, or it's okay to go unmasked, whatever. What are the real concerns about what can happen to a vaccinated or an unvaccinated person mixing and mingling with the same unvaccinated, vaccinated people? So in other words, I'm a vaccinated person, I walk into a place, and because it's on our system, there's probably people walking around that also that are COVID positive that may not know it. What is the potential impact even to me now as a vaccinated person versus that person walking around and spreading it to potentially other people doing the exact same thing they are?
Right. I mean, the path out of the pandemic is never going to be zero risk, unfortunately, right? So, no vaccine that we have is 100% protective against preventing all disease. We know that the COVID-19 vaccines that are available are very, very good, in some cases 100% protective against preventing death or critical illness, but there is still a small percentage that will go on and get COVID-19, just a milder case after vaccination. That is incredibly small percentage though. So those who are vaccinated are very, 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 very well protected and have a very, 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 very low likelihood of being able to spread disease to anybody else. And that is the difference than those who are unvaccinated. So we've kind of switched the emphasis a little bit, where the vaccinated person choosing to be unmasked is most likely really well protected. It's the unvaccinated person now that is at greatest risk of disease themselves or spreading disease to other people. Every time the disease is transmitted from one person to another, it's an opportunity for a new variant to further spread or be created. And that's what makes me really nervous about ongoing spread and people who are choosing to not wear masks when they are not vaccinated. Also, again, children are not yet vaccinated, and children do have the illness and do spread it. Yes, it is much more mild, but it's still, and they can spread to adults and they can spread to other people, whether it be in their household or in other social situations. So anytime we spread, we risk variants, and we don't know what that next variant is going to do. And I know that sounds kind of like fear mongering and stuff, but it is the truth of the matter. We just don't know. We have been incredibly lucky thus far, where the vaccine is covering anything, and the variant hasn't changed to now making children catastrophically ill, but we just don't know how those are going to progress over time. So, a person who is vaccinated can feel reasonably confident that they are, again, relatively safe. If they have a very high risk loved one in their household, then I think they're going to still want to take some precautions, because that risk to the person in their household potentially is so great, but that's going to be a small percentage of the people. So, understanding your own risk factors and your family's risk factors are still super duper important. But really right now, it's the people who are unvaccinated are at the greatest risk. And if you look at the Monroe, I'm not sure, I don't know your county's data off the top of my head, but the Monroe County data, if you look at it over the past number of weeks, especially since younger people can now get vaccinated, the number of positives are pushing way down. So now it's the younger teens and kids who are the high prevalence of disease. And we've seen that nationwide, where about last year, there was about 3% at this time, or actually last April, about 3% of the population, 3% of the COVID cases were in the pediatric population. This April, about 25% of the cases were in the pediatric population. So the disease is going to find a host. and you just don't want to be that host.
That's actually true here, is that when we look at our numbers of who's getting it, it's the 20 and under crowd. It's the unvaccinated crowd, because you can watch that it's gone down, the positives. You know, it tracked the age groups getting vaccinations. So, you know, the I'm 20 and I'm invincible group, and then the groups that were not able to get it and now are able to get it, and then those that still aren't, it's still that group that's, like you said, it's finding hosts among them, and that's where our positives are coming from. So just a couple more questions I'll ask, and then I want to just remind anybody, if they want to put something in the chat, to do that now. I wanted to ask about your thoughts. When do you think that full vaccine approval will be happening? Maybe guessing a timeline, and how far out do you think we'll be looking at boosters, and is that probably a likely thing to happen?
When you say, do you mean as far as full vaccination amongst all age groups, or do you mean removal of the EUA? The
EUA removal,
okay.
You know, because I think they're sort of staging, right? Probably the first one is Pfizer, that'll be removed, and then because they're maybe talk about the periods that they're in right now and what's happening and what that future looks like.
Yeah, so all of these things are understandably regulated and are based on time and data collection. And so, you know, when we talk about vaccines and long-term effects of vaccines, from what we know is any other vaccine that's ever been created, that side effects happen within the first 6 weeks after vaccination, if there's going to be a side effect. That's been true throughout history. And so for emergency use authorization, that's why they need to look at least 2 months of data before they would even consider offering the emergency use. And so, you know, it goes beyond what we know where we've ever seen any type of side effect. So that's why that first timeline is put into place. And then beyond that, it's number of months. I believe they're at 6 months, I believe, so right now where we are is Pfizer has, and I believe Moderna has as well, but could just be one of them, has already made the request for approval. And so when they have their meeting, that will be discussed. So I fully anticipate that we will move to full FDA approval this summer of at least the 2 mRNA vaccines. The J&J is going to just be a little bit behind schedule there. With regards to the different age groups, we expect the next grouping of data in the next age group down, which should be 5 to 11-year-olds. We expect, if things continue as planned right now, we expect that next batch of data to happen in September or by September. And as far as boosters, it's hard to know. And some of that's on us, right? Is if we can keep the spread down and decrease the number of variants, and us actually is the whole world, right? We love to think of our own communities, but everything is, you know, a plane ride away. So things can spread very easily. But if variant amount can stay down, then we'll see. I think the point is that they are preparing, should it be needed, so there's not a scramble. So everyone is ready. You know, the flu shot that we get every year is, in essence, it's kind of a booster. It's redesigned for the variation of the flu that we think is coming, but it's the vaccine you received last year still provides some protection to you. So it's built on it. With regards to if you got the Pfizer, can you get a Moderna booster or vice versa? We don't know. And it'll kind of depend on what the issue is. You know, if we might find that the Pfizer continues to fight all the variants beautifully, but maybe the Moderna doesn't. So maybe we'll give the people who receive the Moderna a Pfizer booster. I just don't know. We just don't know yet, but it's a work in progress. But instead of waiting until we really need it, they're planning ahead, which is the approach we definitely want. So everybody is ready should the need arise.
Good. Thank you. I don't have any thing in the chat, which is, I guess, is good because we're covering quite a bit. I guess we're heading almost to about 9:45, and we'll keep this certainly under an hour. Why don't I ask both of you to, if you would, offer any final sort of thoughts? Where are we going? What are your perspectives? Share a story, whatever.
I'm sorry. We started this process initiative in March. We did some interviews in the 9-county region that we serve. So we're talking about Chemung, Livingston, Monroe, or Ontario, Wayne, Wyoming, Yates, Seneca, Schuyler, Steuben as well. So I remember, but we were trying to talk to people in those 9 counties, and we also included Genesee, Orleans, and we tried to talk to folks in Wyoming, kind of reaching out to get their opinions and their thoughts about, will you take the vaccine? Why won't you? And kind of get a finger on what was the hesitancy and what were the reasons for the hesitancy, and who would they really want to hear from about taking the vaccine. And we heard loud and clear that the trusted person that they would want to hear this from would be their doctor, their primary care provider, a medical professional, So if you could engage your healthcare providers to reach out, contact their patients, give it their stamp of approval, then I think that might help your numbers.
Yeah, I agree completely. And there's so much misinformation out there. And once you hear something scary, it's really hard to recover from, right? Because you get that what if and that what if in your head. And that's it's really, really loud sometimes, especially when you're talking about your own children, right? We want to make sure we keep our kids as safe as possible. So I think that if you have heard some information, heard some stories, or whatever you identify as the facts that might be giving you concern, please take that information to your own doctor, to your pediatrician, to your family practice doctor, and go through the list. I guarantee your doctor is happy to talk to you about it. Some practices have websites where they've already kind of answered a bunch of the questions. The University of Rochester certainly has, but again, I think that personal connection with somebody who knows your child or your family history best, that you've always trusted with the care of your child, if they can answer those questions or kind of level set for you. Because I think there's so many things that I've started to hear that people are hearing from unreliable sources that they're taking as fact. And once we can go through them. So it's not just take your questions, it's take what you're identifying as information or as fact that's causing you to have concern, and take that to your healthcare provider and go through it with them. They will be happy to talk to you about it.
Great. Do you have any recommended favorite websites where people can go to get information that you like to recommend?
Yeah, I'm a big fan. The American Academy of Pediatrics has a parenting website called healthychildren.org. They have information on anything kids, but they have a huge section on COVID-19. The Finger Lakes region certainly has their own helpful website too, but kind of all parenting stuff, healthychildren.org.
Great, thank you. Kathi, did you have any favorite source?
Nothing that I can pull up right away, but I can send it to you if you wanted to send that out after the fact.
Okay, I know that there's the vaccine hub, and we share that once a week with everyone in our emails. But I mean, there's a lot of information. I think sometimes there's so much that people don't know where to go. But if there's a good one, like you just mentioned, Dr. Murray, that especially parents with that want to get something more specific and stop getting information off of Facebook. So
you can follow me on Twitter if you'd like
okay, well, good.
At Doc E. Murray on Twitter and Instagram. So
okay, well, there you go. So that could be someone else's favorite right now. Okay, well, thank you for taking so much time with us today to present a lot of information. If anyone has any questions, they can certainly email me and I can reach out and probably get an answer from one of you as well. But thank you again to Dr. Murray for taking the time, and to Kathi Lynch with Common Ground Health for putting the Speakers Bureau together and making it available. And I know you've been doing a lot of outreach in different counties and different organizations, different groups. So this was helpful today. Hopefully it's helpful to our members and those that end up watching it. So just thank you very much. Thanks everyone for attending, and be well.
Thank you.
Okay.
Take care.
Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you, you too.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.